Welcome back, friends and colleagues. In this video, we're going to be discussing the ways that you, in 2026, can release your homebrew Game Boy games that you've made yourself. And we're not just talking about the original Game Boy here, we're also talking about Game Boy Color games, anything that you put onto one of the original carts that plays in an emulator, right? But stay tuned because we have 6 categories that we can release and play our games through in 2026. This is from the very simple, what you could do if you make a Game Jam game, for example, to authentic, how to get it actually on physical cartridge, and then finally onto mass audiences, how we can get on every console. So to kick it off, at number 1, we have itch.io. So this is a website that lets us upload our games for free. Unlike Steam, which has a price to upload, we can upload all our games and they can be from any size. We can sell the games. So for example, here's one I'm selling called Office Combat for $2. And they can play the entire game in browser because I exported it from GB Studio as a web build. GB Studio is the game engine I use to make my Game Boy games. And if we scroll down here, we can see that the purchase price is $2. And it gets you the project files and also the GB file. The GB file is what the emulators will be using when you want to play a game. So with itch.io, you can host your games in browser, which can then be played on PC or on your mobile phone with touching the glass of your phone screen, which is kind of annoying. Or you can literally sell any files related to your game. So you can sell the file that they can emulate, or you could even sell an exe, which we'll talk about later. And since we're uploading a web build here, technically we can also put this on our own website, right? We could embed a GB Studio web build in our own website, or we could host it on someone else's website. For example, here's a game I made for a game jam. I sold it to coolmathgames.com, and they have it on their site here as well. So because it can export a web build, people with websites can host the game on their website. But I think that itch.io is the main example here because it acts as like a marketplace where people come for other games and they find yours too. And you personally can control the sales of your games through what you upload. And you can change it and add loads more. There's not a big approval process or anything. It's very simple and almost anyone can do it. Number 2 is connected to number 1. I'll just tack it on the end here because although I was mainly talking about the web build there, itch.io also, like I said, lets you upload any file, and it lets you upload the ROM file. And it doesn't just have to be itch.io that you sell the ROM file. It could be on your own website. It could be through Kickstarter, whatever it is. You don't have to sell an executable of your game. You could instead sell the ROM file that people will play in emulator. So itch would be a perfect place to do this, or you could have your own website, or if you are more interested in the Analog Pocket, which is a more modern device that doesn't play ROM files specifically in itself, it uses .pocket files which GB Studio can export, then you can instead sell that file. But when you release your Game Boy games, you don't have to just have it as a web build or physical. You could literally give them the file to emulate themselves. They can also put it into flashcards, right, and do it themselves. Like the Easy Flash Junior has an SD card in it that they can load all of their games on and play them all from one thing, which is really helpful if they're not too worried about building a massive collection of physical cartridges. But this, as you can tell, is a step closer to what we're going to be talking about next, which is number 3, physical cartridges. Now, there's 2 ways of doing physical cartridges. Number 1, homemade. I've done this before with Take It Racing 2. I made physical cartridges. I bought them from China. I shipped them here. It took a month or something. I bought sticker labels from a company that was the perfect size and had sheets of them sent to me. I also bought a flasher so I could reflash these bootleg cartridges with my own game and take off the sticker and put my own sticker on. I didn't go as far as making the boxes. That was already enough work for me. But you can do it homemade, or you can do it through another company. And years ago when I made a similar video to this, there were publishers that could do this for you, where you'd have to submit your game and you'd go through the process of working it out with them. But now, so there's a new kid on the block here by the name of Homebrew Factory, which will distribute your Game Boy games physically for you. They have 2 ways of doing this: pre-orders and just basically you paying the upfront cost to host the game on their website. So if we have a look in the pre-orders here, you can see I helped make one of these games that was successfully made called Island Fever. I'm not connected to this game anymore though. But basically you have a minimum pre-order that you get to choose based on how you upload the game and all the files and the price you want to charge them. And then you obviously yourself have to encourage people to come and pre-order the game. And then once it hits the minimum required, it can go over because it has a 30-day window. And then everybody will get their game. And if it doesn't reach that target, then it doesn't get made. But that's fine because there's a second way of doing it where you pay the upfront cost to then have it in stock on their website where they will sell the game for you. And this means you don't have to create your own website. You can instead link to this and they can handle it all for you. So if you're a game developer and you want to release your game physically, this takes a lot of the stress off of you. You don't have to manage orders, returns, all that malarkey. You can have this website do it for you. Now, there does still exist publishers that will put your game physically out and also help you do a marketing push, right? So that you're more likely to actually make some money with it. That's kind of the crux of this. Although you can release your game quite easily in 2026, the real problem you'll probably come into is hitting sales targets that will help make game development sustainable for you. But if you only want to make one game and you want to share it with your friends and family and or have it up for other people to buy, then there are things out there, and I would probably suggest Homebrew Factory. But this doesn't mean that you don't have to put it onto a cartridge yourself. It's actually quite fun and rewarding to do it yourself, because then it can teach you that that's not something you want to do, and you might want to do the Homebrew Factory way or get it published by a physical publisher instead. It's up to you. You get to experiment and try. Moving on to the next one, number 4 is Steam. How do you get your game onto Steam? A lot of people play games on Steam. You almost expect to have a game on Steam. It's like the baseline for what a game is these days, and it's almost too easy. Getting your game onto Steam doesn't mean your game is a good game, after all, right? It just means that you can sell it to probably the most amount of people the simplest way, right? It's kind of like reaching a mass audience. It's like step 1 to reaching a mass audience. So to do that, you will need to export your game as an executable, and GB Studio doesn't have this feature built in. However, there is a plugin for Godot, which is called GameBoy, and GameBoy basically is an emulator that runs in Godot, which therefore lets you build an exe just like you'd build an exe of a Godot game. And apparently this also lets you make a build for Google Play as well, so if you want to get it on mobile, which we'll talk about after this. There are other ways of getting your Game Boy game to be an exe using similar things as this. There's another thing called bubble wrap, and this bubble wrap lets you also put your game as an exe. The other way of doing it is to just simply code it yourself, right? Is if you were to make a game in Unreal or Unity and create an emulator that can run your ROM file, you can then build the game like you'd build a Unity or an Unreal game as a Game Boy game executable. So you can get your Game Boy game on Steam in 2025, and there are a few examples. The first one I can think of is Glory Hunters, which was made in GB Studio, and I think I even talked to the creator on my podcast a few years ago. So let me recap before we go to the last two. First of all, we had web browser, so we can put it on our own websites, we can sell it to other websites, or we can just put it on itch.io. My favorite thing to do that is put it as a demo and then sell them the ROM, which is number 2. We can sell the ROM, we can give the ROM away, we can give away the demo of the ROM, which people can then play in emulators, or they can play if they were to put the ROM file into a flash cartridge. And then number 3, we talked about physical. So we talked about getting your game onto an actual physical cartridge yourself, or using Homebrew Factory, or going through a publisher. And then number 4, we talked about using GameBoy or using another game engine to emulate the Game Boy ROM file that the GB Studio creates, and then being able to distribute it onto Steam or even onto the Google Play Store. And then number 5 now, we're talking about consoles. How do you get your game onto console? It's a similar story to GameBoy in the way that you need to create an executable that runs in the console of your choice. However, to get your game onto console often requires you to go through different checks and rating systems. And to do that yourself might be very time consuming and even expensive. They often really care about high quality getting onto their platforms. Like, for example, the Nintendo Game Store. I think they care a lot about it being very child friendly, so you might have to actually adjust your game to fit what they want. However, as I talked about in my last video, the GB archive now exists that you can submit your game to, and so we are slowly trying to help you guys to get your games onto major consoles through this initiative. Caracal Games has put my game onto the Switch, Ticket Racing 2, and a few other games, one of theirs, and Traumatarium, and they want to keep doing this. So if you want your game on Switch and on other consoles and to be written in the history books, submit your game here, and we'll help some of you get your games onto major consoles. Unfortunately, it is limited and curated, like we can't accept everybody, because it does take so much time and resources to do just one. But we're hoping as we do more and more, it will get quicker. And moving on to number 6, the final one is how do we get our games on mobile? We talked about using GameBoy to create an executable to put onto the Google Play Store. However, if you've ever played it on your phone, like touching the screen, the glass, it is really not fun. Like using a controller or using an actual Game Boy, the buttons, the tactility is everything, right? So you can do a custom release like that and get your game onto mobile. However, I'd say if you really want your game on mobile, then you need to check out Playtiles. Now, I've made a video about them before. They're now into season 2, and the idea is that they have a controller that sticks to your screen using friction. It doesn't leave any residue or anything. And then these buttons basically, translate your button presses from your fingers through into the phone screen. So it can be kind of temperamental. Like I have quite a thick screen protector on mine, so I find that this is kind of frustrating sometimes. However, this isn't the most up-to-date version of this controller thing, and I would love to get my hands on the next one to try it out. Because I wasn't having that much fun with it, I was hesitant to talk too much about it. But this is probably the best way of playing your Game Boy game on your phone screen if you're not going to connect a controller to it, right? If you're just going to connect a controller to your phone, beautiful. However, this fits in your pocket. I don't think really controllers do. So if you love Game Boy, like I hope you do, then this is to consider, right? Using this on your phone screen is perfect because there are developers on here who get each week they release another group of games, and you can be one of those people if you submit your game to it, right? If we go over here to the developers tab, we can see that we can submit a game here ourselves. And if you are a serious game developer, or you want to be, or you just have a game that you think that people need to play, I would recommend trying every single one of these outlets, right? Either yourself or going through one of the third-party kind of ways I suggested here, because different platforms have different audiences, right? People have different budgets, people have different ways of finding games too. So if you were to release your game with Playtiles, for example, they might tweet about it and then somebody sees it and they might not care about Playtiles, but they might realize that you have a physical version of the game and go, wow, I want to play this. Or they might see the physical version and say, all I need is the ROM, and get the ROM. Or they might just try out the demo on itch, for example, in browser. So there's all these different ways that we can increase visibility of our games by simply releasing them and giving players another way to access our games. So I hope you found this video useful. If you think I forgot any, please put them in the comments below for everyone else. This was going to be a longer video where I talk about making a Game Boy game from inception, from like making your first game to release. But I realized that this release part was such an important part that I haven't really talked about in a while. And I wanted to collate every way that we can release our Game Boy homebrew games. So I hope you now feel more confident that if you have a Game Boy homebrew game that you want released, that you now have some framework, some idea of how you can release it 6 different ways. And on that note, I'll put my patrons up on the screen right now. Thank you so much, you guys. You guys are the absolute best. Remember to like the video if you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know what you thought of this video and what you want to see in the next one. And I think this, like I said, this will have to be some kind of series. I've got written down here a couple extra ideas that might follow on from this video. For example, how to make your first Game Boy game, and also what it's like being a hobbyist homebrew game developer versus a professional one. I thought that might be an interesting video. So let me know what you want to see next, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.